Welcome to another awesome episode of Marketing Speak. I'm your host, Stefan Spencer, and today we have Melissa Monte with us. She's the host of the popular podcast Mind Love. When I say popular, it is mind-blowing in terms of the reach and the content and everything. So we're going to learn all about that in just a few minutes. Melissa is an entrepreneur, a former VP of marketing. She's applied her strategic mindset to achieve explosive growth for multiple companies and now for her own. Mind Love podcast is a top mental health podcast in 29 countries. Forbes named her show the #1 podcast for your life and career. Harper's Bazaar called it a must listen. Melissa's been invited to share the stage with top influencers in podcasting like Pat Flynn and Jordan Harbinger. And now she's going to spill her secrets on this show. Great to have you here, Melissa. It's great to see you.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
So we last saw each other at HPS, Heroic Public Speaking. You were taking the graduate program as well as me and Orion, my wife. And I'm just curious because we've had Michael on this show recently, and then he was on my other show, Get Yourself Optimized, several years ago, talking about speaking and performance. And that course was a game changer for me. What was a top takeaway for you?
For me, it really helped me find my story. For such a long time, I was building other people's dreams instead of my own. And so there was a point, it was what started my podcast, that I wanted to start laying a foundation for myself and using a lot of my marketing knowledge to build my own dreams. And I had so many storylines and so many things that I've struggled with and so many ways I could go with it that I was kind of focusing on a broader spectrum until that course, which really helped me drill down like what my unique value proposition is and what I can bring, whether it's to my own podcast, to different courses, and it changed how I work with people.
Yeah, for me too. It's been a game changer. I'm a much better storyteller. I'm much more precise and deliberate and intentional, and I just love what I've learned. So let's talk about your podcast. And you have an origin story for that podcast. I'd love for our listeners to understand how you got started and why.
So I started listening to podcasts years and years ago when none of my friends knew what a podcast was. And I would kind of dabble here and there, but the first podcaster that I felt like I developed that one-sided relationship with was Pat Flynn. And I remember sitting on the floor in Big Bear thinking, one day I'm going to be on his show. He had just had this younger girl on that had made $1 million through webinars. And I was like, I can do that. So I was dabbling and then I, got a job offer and sort of lost that and was building another company again. And then I reached a point in that career where the CEO was a pretty toxic human to work for. It was really stressing me out. It was starting to move from just my work relationship to my other relationships. I would snap at my husband and he'd be like, you realize you just got off the phone with your boss, And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what I'm learning about. It was my biggest passion, was actually learning how to save my own life. So it was kind of a two-way street of I had a pretty good life on the outside, but nobody really knew I was crumbling on the inside. So while I'm still able to be successful with businesses, with my job, I was also dealing with bulimia and depression and all these different things. And so I'd gotten to this point of realizing I needed to learn these tools if I was going to survive. So I was doing that along at the same time. And I had learned all these things and I had gotten to this great place, but I would tell my friends like, oh, you need to get out of harmful situations, get out of toxic situations. Yet I was still allowing myself to be in this toxic relationship at work. So I'd gotten to this point where I thought I need to do something different. So I drilled down to all these exercises on how to find your passion, like when my happiest times had been, what people come to me for, like all these exercises. And I had read about them in books before, but I thought maybe just learning about them, it was going to automatically apply itself to my life. But no, it wasn't until I took a notebook and started doing these things that I started to realize, wait, this is my deepest passion. It's not just the marketing. It's what to market, like what to get out there to people. And so that brought about the idea of Mind Love, but I wasn't yet bold enough to completely quit my job. I started it on the side as a little side project, and it did work. It kept me happy. It kept me inspired. But within about 3 months, I realized, hey, I can do this. I needed to have some sort of evidence for myself that I could be successful with my own stuff, because up until then, I was just too chicken to do it for myself, and I was doing it for other people. So I quit my job, wasn't making money yet, but within 2 more months, I was already able to bring in some sponsorship money, and I was speaking up on a panel at Podcast Movement on how I achieved such quick growth. But at the same time, the podcast idea occurred because I realized, well, I get a little overwhelmed with writing. I would get too perfectionist, and it would take me like days to write one blog post. YouTube videos I could always talk myself out of because I didn't want to get ready and put on the makeup. And so podcasting was really perfect for what I had to offer. I've also gotten comments on my voice and things like that. So it just really seemed to fit me. And the very next day, or within 3 days actually, of deciding that, Pat Flynn announced his first podcasting course. And so that was the first time I really just went all in, really invested in myself, took his course, and yeah, it was a pretty rapid growth from there.
Oh, awesome. And we'll talk more about his course in a few minutes. I want to hear what some of your top takeaways were. But before that, how did you achieve such quick growth that you deserve to be on a panel at Podcast Movement? I've actually pitched Podcast Movement like 3 times, and I have not gotten in yet. It's very frustrating, but yeah, you had a compelling enough story that they're like, we got to get this lady on stage.
Well, I will say so much of my growth has come from my relationships with other people. I've been really great at nurturing the relationships of people who help me in one way or another. And when I launched my podcast, it started, my very first little weird growth hack was the day I launched my podcast. It was actually almost exactly 2 years ago, December 5th, 2017. I woke up super early, all ready to go to my co-working space and share the news about this podcast. This was my launch day. And as soon as I opened my door, I was hit by this black cloud of smoke. Apparently, there was a ton of fires in LA. My first thought at this moment, because I had a one-track mind, was unfortunately not all the damage it was doing, but man, less people are going to be at my co-working space to tell about my podcast. Shows how desensitized we are about the fires, though. Well, so I went to get a smoke mask because health is important. While I was there, the nearest CVS by my co-working space, I just decided, well, if I'm thinking about a smoke mask, other people must be too. And if there's going to be less people at my co-working space, then I need to make sure I optimize how many people I can tell about my show. So I bought out all the smoke masks and I went to my co-working space and I put up a little booth on floor 2, posted on the WeWork network, come to floor 2, free smoke masks. And every time somebody came, I convinced them to subscribe to my podcast, leave a review, and I would tell them about it. And I'm not sure this particular thing moved the needle that much, although I did get my first 30-something reviews my very first launch day. But there was something about taking that action that changed my mindset. It got me to think in a different way about just being bold about where I shared my podcast and really trying to... There's something that I've noticed a lot of entrepreneurs do in the very beginning where they have this thing that they're working on and they want everyone to know about it, but they're also somehow keeping it a secret in their own circles. Like they're afraid it's going to fail or they're afraid somebody's going to think it's silly or whatever. And this got me out of that from the get-go. And then from then, I just started to think, well, at the time, Apple wasn't updating new and noteworthy at all. So I thought, if I'm going to be featured anywhere, I need to think outside the box. And so that, even if you just set a goal like that with yourself, I think, the brain will start to come up with ideas that you didn't think were possible for you to think of. You might not think I'm a creative person, or you might not think I have a marketing mind, but it just takes putting your foot out there, like taking real tangible action on anything, as dumb or small as the idea is, and your brain will start to come up with more things. So I I decided to download every third-party podcasting app and look for which ones had their own featured sections that were guaranteed to be updated more than Apple's new and noteworthy. And then I began the process of building relationships with those people. I followed them all on social media. Whether it was Castbox, a podcast app, anything that came out, even if it was brand new. And I would just try to connect with people on LinkedIn and pitch my show to them. But I also had to think, well, because my show is brand new, maybe there's only a few episodes, why would they feature my show above other people who might have already had influence? Because I started with zero list, zero audience, like no connections at all. And so I had to think of how I could get it to be good enough for them to feature me. So I had a 20 episode plan to edit my show in a completely different way than I was going to do in the future. And I needed to have this stop because if I thought I was going to do this for every episode for the end of time, I would have overwhelmed myself. It took me about 8 hours to edit each episode. But when somebody was telling a story, I would put immersive sound effects and just make it stand out just for a short period of time. So when I pitched this brand new show, I not only used all the validation I could from anywhere else in my life, but I also said, like, this will be unlike any mindfulness interview show that you can hear. I was learning how to pitch it, would actually track which pitches worked, which didn't, and all of those things combined, the quality was definitely a huge part in that, because no matter how savvy your marketing skills are, if you don't focus on that quality too, and you think, well, I'll just start this as a side thing and throw up an interview with no editing, no thought really into it, you're going to have a leaky bucket. You're going to have 1,000 people come, but you need to make sure they're going to stay at the same time. So you've got to focus on both sides of that.
Yeah. Wow. That was all fantastic. And I just love your go get 'em sort of attitude, and reminds me of Les Brown's famous quote, "You got to be hungry." I don't know if you've heard that before.
Yeah.
I just love how he says that. You got to be hungry, and you were hungry, and it goes beyond marketing to like growth hacking, to figuring out like how can I work my way in the door, maybe even go backstage and meet the star of the show, right? Like, let's just dream big. I learned this from this Karis negotiating seminar in the 90s, way back when. Aim higher, you'll do better, right? So you aim for the stars, and you might even hit it. And that's what you did. You just really went out the gate going for first place, and I applaud you for that. I have a somewhat similar story of growth hacking my way into my previous business that I had eventually sold 15 years later, but I did a bit of a growth hack myself. I had no clients, and I was up to my eyeballs in student loan debt. I just dropped out of my PhD to start this agency. I hadn't had any business classes, marketing classes, anything. I just was winging it. And I talked my way into this conference that normally was like $2,000, $2,500 to attend. I didn't have the money, so I got in for free as a volunteer. And they gave me the job of mic runner. So I was running around with a microphone during Q&A. And I thought, wow, I got the mic, and these guys up on stage don't really know online marketing like I do. I was this, cheeky 23, 24-year-old. I just decided to start chiming in and help answer the questions because they weren't being adequately answered by the panelists. And I totally upstaged them. I got a big stack of business cards by the end of that day, and I ended up with 2 big accounts that were worth each $500,000 a piece in customer lifetime value. I didn't need to get any angel investing or anything. That was my seed money, was just landing these 2 accounts. But I was also de-invited from volunteering on day 2 because apparently I had ruffled some feathers with some of the speakers.
That's hilarious. That actually reminds me of in 2009, I won a contest online and got free tickets to Traffic and Conversion Summit. At the time, it was in Austin. And at the end, I don't know if they still do this, but they used to always have the Wicked Smart competition at the end. And you could share any internet marketing secret that you could. And I was sitting in the back of the room. I was one of the only women at that time, even at that conference. It was very heavily more male than women. And I felt like I was the youngest woman there too. Like I just felt out of place, but people were sharing their marketing tricks. And I was this 23-year-old trying to do everything so free because I was not willing to invest in any of the marketing yet. I was like, finding torrents and downloading courses and stuff. And so I had these weird hacks that nobody was using that now are considered black hat. And I went up there and I ended up winning the contest, and it set up my freelance career for the next 2 years. So it's like weaseling your way in really does pay off, and people are just too afraid to do it. But you got to realize not a lot of people are that bold. And so you really have a good chance if you take that risk.
Yeah. That reminds me of a good job on that, by the way. That reminds me of a friend of mine. I won't name him because he didn't authorize me to share this, but he was a member of Abundance Digital, which is Peter Diamandis's online program for futurism and all the cool stuff that's coming, 3D printing and nanotechnology, AI, et cetera, et cetera. So he's in a digital version. I'm in Abundance 360, which is the in-person version, which is markedly more expensive. It's $15K to attend a 3-day event. So it's a whole other level. So he hears when the event is and where it is. As a digital member, he can watch the live stream, but he started hanging out in the general area where the event was, like working his way closer and closer. And then he actually got in to like through the back door, hanging out with some of the folks who were pretty like top tier people in the Abundance 360 community, like Dan Sullivan. So he's hanging out with Dan Sullivan and backstage at the event that he doesn't even have a ticket to. And I think, wow, that's you got gumption there. That's impressive. Anyways, okay, so I'm not endorsing these techniques by any stretch. Just be hungry and get out there and be willing to be uncomfortable. The quality of your life is directly proportional with how comfortable you are with being uncomfortable. And I think that's a lesson in life, not just in marketing.
For sure. Yeah. I have been taking weird risks my whole life. Really makes my mom nervous, but I'm now finally starting to funnel them into something that's going to create something good rather than just throwing it out there. So yeah, being comfortable in the uncomfortable, I believe that we really will. If we don't seek those challenges on our own, then they're going to find us in a way that's out of our control. So there's really no downside to actually pushing yourself more than you think you can go.
Yeah, that's kind of a spiritual concept. It reminds me from something I learned in Kabbalah class that if you are proactive in going after ways to evolve your consciousness, to elevate your soul, then there's a lot of blessing in that. And otherwise, we tend to get hit with these unfortunate traumatic experiences, which after the fact make us who we are and reveal all this light and make all this opportunity possible for us, all this growth. But at the time, it's hell on earth, or it feels that way. And just go after this stuff proactively. Get outside your comfort zone, because then you can reveal a lot more light in the world, which is what you do on a weekly basis with your show, right? You're out there revealing light and helping people to evolve, expand, and elevate.
Yeah, I mean, I realized at some point there was, like when I said I was in this dark pit in my life, there were so many things out of my control, but it seemed that the more victim mentality I kept in that, the more even self-sabotage I seemed to do. It was this endless vicious cycle. And so I've definitely found, like, as I've started to climb out of that, as I've started to find my own way, a big part of that is being vulnerable and sharing these things instead of holding on to our shame. Like, we're all walking around like there's something wrong with us or with something that we're afraid to share with other people. And when I started sharing my own, I realized, how not alone I am. And it started to feel like my duty. I learned these things. And so it's my duty to share it with whoever needs to hear that in my own way. And I think so many of us are like, well, this is already being done, or people are already saying this, or how am I ever going to match this person? But no one's going to say it exactly how you say it or how I say it. And I'm going to attract my own tribe based on not just the message I have, but the person that I am and how I've gotten here. So it's definitely served me well.
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking of shame, it's a powerful disincentive for getting outside your comfort zone and growing and evolving. And, funny that story that I shared about being a mic runner volunteer was something I didn't share with anybody for, I don't know, 15, no, more than that, 17 years. And then I realized that, wait a second, what am I ashamed of? I was essentially kicked out of the conference, but I would never have done it differently. I mean, knowing what I know now, I probably wouldn't have done it in the same way. And it was this huge shortcut to success. It saved me who knows how many months or years in my trajectory. So if I just release any kind of shame that I have and share the lessons from these sorts of things, and there are plenty of situations where it's something embarrassing or whatever, and I just got to let go of it and share the lesson, and then it doesn't have its hold on me anymore. So that's the gift for me, and the gift for others is they get to learn from it without going through the embarrassment themselves.
I know. It's really funny. I see. It's so funny too, the shift in perspective, because you can see all the stories from either side. I can see where you came from, that almost being ashamed that you were kicked out of a conference, but there's also this other side. The way I absorbed it and the way I heard it was that was awesome. And that's something that more people should do, those risks that people take for their goals. Like, I would have never assumed to even hold shame over that. Like, I got kicked out of George Clooney's house by Secret Service once. And I never even thought to be ashamed of that. I thought it was hilarious.
That's something to be proud of. That's impressive. Good job. Well,
I didn't break in. I crashed a party.
Okay. Well, that's impressive though. Now, the shame that I had, I have to kind of juxtapose with this proud moment I had. Not only did I get the account that I got, but I also got, strangely enough, invited to speak at an upcoming event, which was like 6 months later. It was like, I don't know, 3 months after the event, after I got kicked out of how to market on the internet. I got invited to speak at, chair, and do a post-conference workshop on how to market educational programs on the internet.
Wow.
So that launched my speaking career, and I was horrible. I was just embarrassingly bad at speaking, especially at chairing. Like, you have to be so witty and on it the whole time, and keep the energy up in the room. And I was a train wreck at that. And so I did a terrible job, but I was committed to getting really good at it. And Tony Robbins says repetition is the mother of skill. So I'm just like, boom, boom, boom. I'm going to keep at it. And these different conference organizations, they poach each other's speakers. So as soon as I showed up on a brochure from IQPC, then IIR started poaching me and asking me to speak at all their events. And then I got other invites too, and I kept speaking at IQPC events, et cetera, et cetera. So I just started saying yes to everything. And by now I've done thousands of speeches over the years. But that was just so ironic to end up getting invited to speak, chair, and workshop by the same organization, but a different conference organizing person. So clearly they don't speak to each other. I just thought, it's hilarious. Yep.
Well, I really do feel it's those relationships that we make, no matter how we make them, that really push us forward. So even now, like when I go to Podcast Movement, I almost didn't go last year, but then I last minute got invited to speak with Pat Flynn. So I made the last minute trip. And when I left, I realized, okay, I can't miss this conference anymore because I made the most of it. Because I was putting all this money out there, that's why I wasn't going to go, because I had still been trying to build my business, and I was trying to be smart with my money. And I ended up putting a bunch on credit cards to get there. And so I thought, if I'm going to be spending this money, I'm going to make the most of it, which is something I've really learned back in those days in the early 20s when I was always trying to get it for free. Nothing penetrated. But when I really started to invest money in myself, I'm like, this won't be a waste of money. So while I was there, I hung out at all the booths at Podcast Movement. And I didn't leave until I was actually friends with the marketing guy from Spotify and Stitcher and like whatever. And so now I have this like Rolodex of people that I reach out to if I have a big episode. But that came from nurturing the relationships within the podcasting community, which it sounds like you did with kind of the conference organizers as well, even if you didn't really know you were doing it at the time.
Yeah. Well, I definitely made a lot of great relationships in the conference circuit with fellow speakers, with conference organizers, with CEOs and attendees and so forth. It's been the biggest revenue generating marketing channel of everything I've done is the conference speaking. I've easily generated 8 figures by now in revenue from speaking through bringing in leads that converted into good sized contracts. So yeah, definitely pays.
Well, it makes sense because you don't have to convince people you're an expert, because just by nature of you being there, you've already kind of shown that, and then you just have to back it up. So I love that.
Right. Yeah. And one of the ways I back it up is to hand out copies for free of this 1,000-page book that I co-authored, The Art of SEO. So that's some pretty serious social proof. I certainly can't throw it out from the stage. I'll hurt people, but people come running up to the stage to get free copies once they start to realize like I've got more than one that I'll give away. It makes for quite a little spectacle. It's pretty fun.
You got to get photos of that.
Yeah. I have some. Okay, so let's talk about some of the milestones that you have reached with your podcast, and when and what kind of milestones these were.
So around the 6-month mark, as I said, I was not only invited to a panel hosted by Jordan Harbinger, but I also was just getting my first sponsorship money, and it wasn't that much, but that largely had to do with relationships I built with third-party podcast apps. And so it's really beneficial to look at companies that are growing, that are still on the brink, but also growing quickly, because chances are they have little opportunities and they're more willing to work with podcasters, especially ones that if you can back up with the quality of your work. None of this stuff will work if you are just throwing your show together. So that needs to be like 70% of your focus is the quality of your show and just little things to make it stand out. So I reached over 1 million downloads within my first year. I have been in the top charts of both health and fitness and education categories. I've reached number 11 podcasts. It was very brief, but it meant a lot to me. And I'm usually in the top 200 of health and fitness now. It's just often in there. I peaked at number 2. So being featured in Forbes and Harper's Bazaar was also really exciting to me. But I think most of it is just receiving so many emails from people every single day, really understanding how the work is touching people's lives, because all those other things are kind of like, a little boost of motivation or validation, but it's not quite as meaningful if I wasn't hearing from my listeners all the time. And part of how I stay so connected to them is by really connecting with them and seeing what they want. I send out surveys every 3 months or so to understand what their number one struggle is. That way I know not only what their struggles are, but also how they're saying it, the words that they're using, because the more advanced that you get in your own craft, the harder it is sometimes to relate to people in the beginning of the journey. So understand who you're trying to speak to and how to do that. Keep a person in mind. Those things really help. And other things are, be really specific about how you want your audience to engage with you. And if you want them to share, if you want them to review, don't give out 17 CTAs per episode, but be really deliberate on what and why you want them to do it. One thing that's really helped with the growth of my show, a lot of my show is grown through word of mouth. And I ask people to share, but I don't just ask people to share I tell them how to share. And so there's a couple different ways that I do this. I say, take a screenshot and post it on Instagram and tag Mind Love Podcast or Mind Love Melissa. Those things, like the actually being descriptive about take a screenshot, because if you just say share this episode, people don't always know how to share the episode. And so where do you hang out most? What platform are you trying to grow? Maybe it's Twitter, maybe it's Instagram, whatever, and be specific about how to share to that platform, even if it's press the share button located right here and share. So that's how, but if you tell somebody who to share it with, the moment somebody gets it in their mind about who needs to hear this episode, it increases the likelihood that they're going to share this like tenfold. So for example, I had an episode on breakups, and at the end, and in the beginning, I said, everyone has that friend who just can't seem to get over her ex, or who's still wallowing in their last relationship, or can't hold a relationship, whatever it is that's really descriptive of who needs to hear that. And they'll get somebody in their mind, and then they will share the episode with that person. They won't be able to let it go, because next time they see that person, they're going to attach that memory. So things like that, just being so deliberate with how you want your strategy to be, even if you don't know it's going to work, can be really, really helpful.
That is awesome. I love especially what you're talking about with somebody in mind that can benefit from listening to this episode. Put that person in your mind right now, because I do that very thing, not with my show. I really need to do that, but with my speaking. Oftentimes at the beginning, I will tell people in the audience that, all right, your retention rate on average will be at best 30-some%. Which is not very high, and that's at best. If you want to increase it to something like 90%, the hack for that is to simply think of someone who you can teach what you're learning here in my talk to others. Somebody who can hugely benefit from what you're about to learn today and what you're going to teach them. So, for example, my oldest daughter started doing SEO and blogging at 14 years old. She had passive income coming in, sometimes up to $1,000 a month. And then by 16, she was speaking on stages. She spoke at BlogHer, she spoke at YPulse and so forth. And that launched this career. Now at 28, she's got her own SEO firm. She's been on MSNBC. And if I hadn't inspired her, I don't do the work for her. I just inspired her and gave her some of the tools and some of the guidance. Imagine what you could do with your child, your partner, your best friend, your aunt, uncle, parent, just by teaching them some of the techniques you're about to learn. And then that's a game changer for the rest of the session. They're so much more engaged. So I do that on my speaking, but not on the podcast. I really need to do that. Thank you.
And take that to another level, not just specific type of child that needs to hear this the most. Like, do you have the child who's always asking extra questions, or does they have a little entrepreneurial spark, or were they trying to set up a lemonade stand at 6? Something that's going to really say, oh, that's my kid. And they're not doubting like, oh, well, I mean, maybe they could be good at that, maybe not. Like, by being even more specific about the children that might help, or by the person that might help, weeds out the people that don't need to, and it really attaches itself to the people that do.
Yeah. And that's related also to the concept that you mentioned of really understanding who you're speaking to. Keep that person in mind, that ideal podcast listener or customer avatar. That's a powerful tip and strategy, and often folks don't even go to the effort of putting down on paper what kind of person they're trying to reach. Demographics, psychographics, clickographics, their fears, frustrations, wants, aspirations, their philosophical problem, their internal problem, external problem, none of that. They don't figure any of that out, and they just wing it. And what a mistake.
Yeah, and I actually take the extra step. Is I always have a running Google Doc that I have titled Language of My Customers. And so this started by first going into other people's audiences and copying and pasting specific pain points, searching things like frustrated or how do I, and just little phrases like that. And including Instagram of some of the people that were sort of related to my industry that I was emulating. And then now it comes in not only podcast reviews, but also emails I get from people. And if I hear a little chunk of, oh, I like the way they said that, I put it in the language of my customers, because not only will that speak to episode ideas, but it'll also speak to how I write the descriptions and my sales pages and my marketing emails.
Yeah. Yeah. Great stuff. And that's something I live and breathe as an SEO expert. I tell my clients they need to really understand the language of their customers, the terminology that they're using, that they're typing into Google. And like I would give an example oftentimes when I'm teaching this concept of a past client, Kohl's Department Stores, and how their CEO was fixated on ranking for the term kitchen electrics. And I just thought that was ridiculous, because nobody's searching for kitchen electrics. Nobody even knows what it is, right? So kitchen electric is a small kitchen appliance like a toaster or food processor or blender, that sort of thing. It sits on the countertop typically. So who knows that? Who uses that in their in common vernacular? It just doesn't happen. So if you're number one for kitchen electrics, don't bother patting yourself on the back, because it's completely irrelevant to anybody except for that CEO who is searching, or maybe a competitor or two. Yeah, definitely great advice. Now, I'm curious as to, like, how do you get people to put the kind of reviews that you want to see into iTunes or Apple Podcasts, into Stitcher or other platforms, because the language of the customers, like the challenges they're facing, their objections for hiring you or as a coach, or working with you, or signing up for online courses or anything like that, if we could incorporate into those reviews some of the objections, then those reviews aren't just like thumbs up, great job, love your show, but it's actually convincing them, influencing them in their decision-making to work with you. How do you get that to happen?
A lot of times I specifically ask for that once people reach out to me. It's really difficult to get them to write exactly what I want them to write from the podcast alone. There's a pretty small percentage of people who will take that action. I bulk my reviews in a way that, like, for example, my one that's coming out this coming week, I did a whole new... I focused more on that than my normal call to action, which really emphasizes my email list. And I said, okay, it's the holiday season. We have our giving hearts open. And I just want to remind you how important reviews are. Like, speak from the heart of why they want to do this and why it's really helpful. And if Mind Love has been really helpful to your life, if it's affected you, if you've gotten some good tips, please leave a 5-star review. If it's less than 5 stars, reach out to me and tell me how I can get better. Something like that. And I'll notice a surge. But I only do that every now and then, because if you keep it every single time, or if you push it every single time, a lot of people get a little bit lackluster about it. About emails that I send out and say, open their heart to me and say how much Mind Love has helped them in their life, or you don't know how much you've saved me, or I feel like we're best friends. And I will write back something really thoughtful. It's really important to engage that and be a human. That's how you develop those, what Pat Flynn calls super fans. But saying, like, you know what, I would love, I'm so glad I was able to help you. I'm wondering, can you write any of this? This was so meaningful to me. I would love for other people to see this perspective. Can you put this in a review? And a lot of times I'll get those really heartfelt, deep reviews. And you can even go, depending on how you feel that relationship is with that listener, to specifically say, like, this sentence stood out to me. Thank you so much. Would you mind putting that in a review? And so that's how you can get a little bit more control. And if you have an email list, the relationship is on another level. And you can be really specific about, hey, if this has been helpful to you, leave a review. The most helpful reviews include this, this, and this, whatever you're specifically seeking.
Right. That's all great. And you can then leverage those reviews outside of the platform, take screenshots, copy some of the text and put that on your praise page. All that sort of stuff is leverageable across lots of platforms. So if you've got, let's say, Google reviews that are locked in that Google My Business listing and they're not on your website, information wants to be free. Let it out there. Let it get some air and get viewed by the rest of the world, and not just people who are looking at your Google My Business listing or your Yelp listing or your Stitcher listing, whatever. Yeah. And another thing that you mentioned that I think is really powerful is to leverage holidays and give a reason why now is the time for you to take this step, to do this thing. Like one thing that I'm about to send out related to the holidays, because we're almost there with a couple weeks to go, is I'm going to send out to my clients an offer that I got the idea from Michael Port, from our beloved instructor from Heroic Public Speaking, is that if you recall, we got to give a free ticket to HPS Core to somebody that we thought would really appreciate it and value it and get something out of it. And I think pretty much everybody did in the program. And I thought long and hard about who to give mine to. So I gave it to a client of mine. And anyway, so that inspired me to think of how can I apply that concept with my own business, because I got so much value out of it, and the person I gifted the ticket got so much value out of it. He still talks about it. Why can't I just do that with my own business? So I thought of like a mini SEO audit that I can gift to my core clients, and they could gift that one each to like one friend, colleague, somebody in their industry, whoever that could really benefit from a mini SEO audit. So I'm going to do that here in the next week.
Yeah, I was thinking about how genius that was too, because when you consider that the biggest objection that most people have when they're buying a high ticket program would be their spousal objections or something like that extra support. Not only do people feel really good being able to gift this thing, it also opens a communication to, like for my husband, I sent my husband, and it was a big expense for us, but after he got back, he's like, okay, I totally get it. So the chances of me going even further in the program immediately increase because I've now got the buy-in from this person. So I thought that was super genius as well. And one way that I apply that to my own work is it's in a little bit of a different way. But when I have a course, I have a specific 30-day mindset course that people go through that people really love. But a lot of times people like it because they don't have people in their life that are currently working on themselves in that capacity. So a lot of times I'll do little specials where bring a friend for free. And that way they have this partner to go through it with. They're more likely to actually complete the course, and they're able to share this. And then they're even more likely to share it with somebody else.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. And then you guys can be accountability buddies together, right? If you're both going through the program, keep each other accountable and motivated. Back to this concept though of holidays and tying into holidays. Have you incorporated, other than the traditional kind of holiday season in December with Christmas and Hanukkah and all that, but what about other times in the year, other holidays that you tie into to do any kind of promotions or any kind of asks or any gives or anything like that? Maybe even like unconventional or little known holidays?
Yeah, I mean, I am a holiday fanatic. I will use any reason to get a little bit extra festive. And so a lot of how I create my content is based on what I needed to hear at one point. It helps keep it really, really personal when I can kind of tune into my younger self or the self of, and not necessarily age younger, but just before I knew what I know now. And so I've done holiday themes. I like the woo-woo stuff on my show. So like sometimes I'll get a little, about mediumship or whatever. I like to really get into the motivating factor of January where people are like, okay, ready for my New Year's resolutions. But a lot of that really just comes back to being so in tune with who your own audience is. Maybe you do not have a festive type audience, so it might not help you quite as much. Maybe you don't like doing sales on Cyber Monday. So I think it's really variable to depending on who your specific audience is and getting onto that level. So for me, I know that there's a lot of like women from 28 5 to 45 listening to my show. And so I know what they like. I know the shows they watch. I know the things they like to drink and all of that stuff. And so I know that they also like the holidays. A good portion of them are going to, and that's going to connect with them. But if you don't have that kind of audience, then you're kind of wasting your time there. But one thing I think is also a really good thing to note as an SEO guy, not a lot of people think about podcast SEO. And the thing is I've shared it with a lot of people and they're like, oh, SEO is dead or something like that, or SEO doesn't apply to podcasts. But what SEO can do for you when you're creating your content is it's really important to understand the algorithms for the platforms that you're creating for, because millions of dollars are spent understanding what is content that keeps people coming back, that makes people take action. And so many people just think about like how many listeners they're trying to get from that and not everything else. That's only one metric in that algorithm, but like how long people are listening to your show, like the average listening time, the subscriber to download ratio, the number of reviews you have, all of those things matter too. So aside from just thinking about how you bring people in, again, you can't fill a leaky bucket. So also be thinking about the little things that you can do to keep people around. So sometimes, coming back to holidays, I will do a little gift or something like that around giving seasons, but stay till the end. I'm going to be giving you this or sharing this tip. And this can be used whether it's a holiday or not. Or doing a teaser clip in the beginning, but making sure that content not only sums up the best content, but what the episode is about, and choose something later on in the episode. It creates that curiosity gap that'll keep people staying around because they're like, but I haven't heard that one clip and that's what brought me in. So they stay. So my show does have a longer than average listening time as well. So the more you can focus on that, even if your goal isn't to rank in the top 200, those things will give you a lot of insight because of all of the money going into actually what it takes to build a really successful podcast.
Yes. Agree on all of that. And one other thing about what you're talking about, understanding the listener, the customer, and being in tune with them. If it's holidays, or make it a meaningful holiday to them. Like if your audience is into woo-woo stuff, then saying, hey, Mercury's in retrograde, so that's why we're going to talk about this, or that's why I want you to check this out. Or if your audience is into, I don't know, like geeky stuff, like, hey, it's Geek Pride Day, it's May 25th, and today we're going to celebrate by X, Y, or Z. So really understanding your customer and resonating with them is so important. There's so much we could unpack with podcast SEO. I don't know if we have time to go there, but I will share that for you listeners, this is not something I'm going to share on the show notes page, like the link to, but if you email me, so me@stephenspencer.com, email me and ask for the Podcast Movement virtual talk on podcast SEO. It's a 50-minute virtual talk I gave at Podcast Movement on the virtual site, so I didn't get in as a real speaker. I got in as a virtual speaker for their virtual ticket. So this was from a couple years ago, and I can't just put it up on the website, but I can send you access to that if you email me individually for it. Okay, so if we have time, we'll talk a few more podcast SEO tips, back and forth. That might be a fun little lightning round. But in any event, I had promised to circle back at some point in our discussion to the Pat Flynn course that you took. I would love to know, like, what are some of the top takeaways or game-changing tips that you got out of that course?
Well, for me, what was really helpful as a perfectionist was to have step 1 through step 10 or whatever just laid out for me, because I historically, it's something I'm working on, have been the type of person that's like, okay, well, now I'm getting to this. Now I need to research which the best platform is. Now I need to research which is the best microphone. And he just laid it out there, gave those options. Even then, I got a little stuck because there were a couple microphone options or whatever. And I'm like, but I already have a Yeti and all this stuff. So I actually sprung for the in-person because at the same time of being like, okay, I could probably figure out this podcasting thing on my own. It might take me way longer. Again, this was one of my first big investments into myself. So I was still had a lot of fear around spending that amount of money, but I knew I was going to this time. And there was an extra in-person 2-day event. And so I knew that my success in the past has often come from my relationships with other people. So it was twofold of having these guidelines of just laid out for me, and then being able to go and develop a relationship with somebody who I would then just start calling my mentor, whether he wanted me to or not. And so what I was able to do there was not only go, but share the knowledge that I knew, really try to be a standout person who gave value in that, but then also, this is what I always do when I join somebody's program. I make myself the star student. I am so heavily involved. I act like it's my part-time job to be giving value in their groups, because what that'll do is people want to share your success, especially his first program. If you can get on somebody's first time they're launching a program, go all in with it, because then that was what got me onto his show, which was my original goal years before he ever launched that course. I was like, I'm going to get on his show. So for me, any course that I've done, most of it, I love having just it laid out for me, but most of it is the relationship that I'm able to develop with that creator, because that'll come back to me. They'll want to share my success. They have an invested interest in my success at that point. So that was the biggest thing I got out of it. But at the same time, I bought a few podcasting courses because I had that mentality, like, I'm going to get in with everybody. I kind of did, but I only went through his course because I found that a lot of the other courses were either overwhelming or underwhelming, and his was exactly the steps that I needed, where I didn't need to go to an outside source to find out any other information, but it wasn't going to take me 9 months to launch my podcast. I launched it in exactly 2 months from the time I purchased that course. And it would have been even shorter if it wasn't for that in-person. But that in-person was really helpful to be like, but is this the right name? All these things that you mull over thinking is the most important thing. And all you really need to hear is somebody smart say, that's a good one. I'm like, okay, I'm ready to go. So yeah, there were a bunch of different things from it, but I do highly recommend that course. And if you want it, I have a coupon code that I can share with your audience that'll give them $100 off.
Oh, perfect. That'd be great. Do you have it offhand? Should we just put it in the show notes?
It's a link, so I'll give it to you for the show notes.
Okay, perfect. And you said that it was just right. It's kind of like the Goldilocks of online courses for you at the time. Not overwhelming, not underwhelming. You have your own course. How do you make your course not overwhelming or underwhelming to all of your constituents?
I try to actually touch in with what people really want, what's really going to help them. So my course is a 30-day program, and it's more mindset driven, about just how to regain control of your life, the tools that really helped me to get to where I am today. So I do always survey people after the course. There was a lot of surveying that went in. Like I said, I used of asking what your biggest challenges when it comes to whatever your course topic is about. Use those words, make sure you're answering all of those questions. And then after the first group, I asked people what they got out of it, what their biggest transformation was from that, what they wish they saw in there, and then constantly tweak based on feedback. So I've gotten a lot of good feedback from it. It's at the point where I'm not hearing a lot of constructive criticism anymore. So I'm working on a new program specifically for entrepreneurs. But like you said in the beginning about finding that avatar, I know how scary that can be in the beginning, because you're afraid of picking the wrong one or excluding people and then changing your mind. And so I didn't necessarily do that in the right way. I went more broad in the beginning, and I had a lot to learn about myself and about my audience. And then I made sure to write those things down. Instead of just getting broader and broader, I got narrower and narrower. So now, not only that, but considering not just who needs to hear this specific content, but who do you really want to work with? Because it's hard to build deeper and deeper programs when the person who needs to hear your content isn't the person that you want to spend your time with. So for example, when you're dealing with mindset, there's a lot of people that are at that very beginning stages of rock bottom, and it's hard for them to even leave their bed. And I know that I'm so grateful to be able to help those people. But as somebody who considers herself very empathic, it's also really difficult for me to do like one-on-one coaching with that because it'll leave me drained. And so through my learning experience, realizing, okay, the people I want to work one-on-one with is this kind of person, the person ready to take action and that wants to transform their life. But I'm still totally fine with having content that's pre-created, that I don't need to sit there and take on their energy for the other groups of people. So consider your wants and desires and what would really make that dream life for you and who that is that you're working with. It's such a huge part of finding that avatar.
Yeah, for sure. Do we have a few minutes to do a bit of a lightning round?
Go for it.
Okay. So you mentioned that you started your podcast so that you didn't have to, well, in part to not have to put on the makeup and all that it was an audio podcast. Mm-hmm. So now are you doing video as well? And if you are, how do you incorporate video into the mix from a marketing standpoint, like YouTube, et cetera?
I have been focusing my video content for Instagram lives and Facebook lives and things like that. So I have found it works for me if I silo different types of content to different platforms. That way it's able to segment your audience in a way that's powerful for you. So I'm still actually working on niching that down a little bit more and transforming my Facebook group to that entrepreneur woman that I hope to be working with that needs to know that process of starting their own business without overwhelming themselves. And so that Facebook group will be specifically for that person. If you want to see me live, meet me on Instagram. That might be switching to Facebook. Again, so much of this is a learning process and checking in with myself every month or every 3 months and figuring out what's working and what's not. What do I wish I had done differently, and just starting that now. And so, I've been keeping video to specific platforms because then it also encourages the people who want that kind of interaction to go connect with me there, which just further builds my audience and my influence.
Right. And so how do you leverage Instagram most effectively? Like, what's the best thing you do on Instagram to drive listens and engagement with regards to your podcast?
Well, one of the ways that I get people to go there is incentivizing them in some way. And I'm not saying sending $1 to everyone who follows you, but more like one thing that I love to do on Instagram is on my podcast quite often, I'll say, connect with me on Instagram. Anyone who shares this podcast, I send a personal voice message to. And I do. There's a little voice message feature within when somebody shares, they automatically show up in a message on Instagram, and I send them a personal voice message. People always respond back with something really enthusiastic along the lines of, oh my gosh, I'm totally fangirling right now, or whatever it might be. So having those little incentivizations. Another one that I like to use is when you share the podcast, I reshare it to my story. That way you guys can connect with each other and see who's in the Mind Love tribe. Just little things like that. Think again, what is going to work for your audience? Does it make them feel good if you reshare on audience is, but not a lot of some other people's are. Maybe it's only Facebook, maybe it's more LinkedIn. So again, get clear on where your audience hangs out and really push to that and figure out like what they want. A lot of what I do too is through my email list. So I have a daily email list called the Morning Mind Love, and it's just doesn't sell to them. They'll still get a sales email when I'm launching something, but they can rely on every day having just this motivational message every morning. So it's something that people want. So how can you make people want whatever platform they're pushing you to? So see what tweaks you need to make to your marketing message to get to that. So I not only give them freebies when they sign up for this, but then they get a meditation, they get a few printables, the things that I know my audience wants, and a daily inspirational message. When I send out that first confirmation email, I say, hey, reply back to me to tell me who would you most like to see on the show, or are there any topics that we haven't yet covered that you love? Then they're replying back, and it's automatically making sure that they're not going to go to spam. So just being deliberate with everything, figuring out little ways at every step of the way how they can add engagement, and then cross-promoting platforms from there. So at the bottom of that email all the time, it says connect on Instagram. So my Instagram following has been increasing. So it just takes a little extra thought.
Yeah. So it's a lot of strategy and yeah, foresight and forethought, and you've got that in spades. So congratulations for all your successes, and I'm sure it's going to continue and grow, and I'm excited to see that happen. Now, if folks wanted to work with you to, I know not one-on-one because you don't do that, but to be part of a group program or get your courses or learn from you, sign up for your daily newsletter, that sort of stuff, where should we send our listener to?
You can connect with me at mindlove.com. Also, I do work with people one-on-one with podcast consulting, just not with specific emotional issues at this given moment. So I am available for podcast consulting. You can book as short as 30 minutes just to see if you're on the right track and get some ideas for your specific message. So you can connect with me on LinkedIn, reach out to me there, or just shoot me an email at melissa@mindlove.com.
Awesome. Thank you, Melissa. And thank you, listener. We'll catch you in the next episode of Marketing Speak.